Tennis championship. Every player he coached was a scholar athlete. Most went to graduate or professional school, and nearly all have led high impact lives. Alan Paul is a best-selling and award-winning author who began his career with the Associated Press and later became a speechwriter in political campaigns for a member of the president's cabinet. His first book, Khoten, Stalin's Massacre and the Triumph of Truth, is widely considered the most authoritative on the subject. He is a graduate of Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. So, without any more delay, I welcome John and Alan.
Well, we're delighted to be here, and thanks for inviting us. John, I defer to you.
Well, I want to say thank you too. We've done several of these, and we're always excited to have people question us about this book. We think it's important for the sports world and for people in general because it's a major topic right now in the sports world, and the sports world is quite large. And Alan and I both love sports, so it's not like we hate sport. We don't. We love it. We've played them all of our life, been involved in them all of our life, coaching and teaching. So we look forward to exposing you to what we think is an important piece of information for people to learn about the sports world today. Alan, you have anything to add to that?
Well, I would just say that to pick up on what John has already said, that the last thing we want to do is anything that would drain the games of their fun and excitement. It's a great part of American culture. It's something that defines us as a people. So we want to keep that joy and fun in it, but it is a fact that the system is now out of whack. And unless some changes are made, we're headed for a very bad place and a whole series of developments with college sports, which I'm sure we'll get into in the discussion. Janet, you want to ask us anything to start, or should we just keep going, or what?
Well, I think it might be helpful for people to know before we start how you met and collaborated. I mean, were you college roommates?
Well, that's an interesting story because I didn't know Alan before we got collaboration on this book. As a matter of fact, it was just a happenstance that I would meet him. I went to a party where I ran into one of my freshman advisees at Duke University and told him that I was writing this book, but I was struggling because I'm not a great writer, but I'm a pretty good coach. And did he know anybody that might be willing to collaborate with me and help me with the writing? And he recommended Alan, and we hit it off right away. It's been a great collaboration because he's interested in sports and so am I, and he's a great writer and I'm a pretty good storyteller. So what we did was get together for the last 4 or 5 years and came out with a very good product, I think. You want to add?
I just like to say that we met over lunch. That was a lunch that was arranged by John's former advisee. And it was evident to me from the very beginning that this had a lot of potential because John had covered the entire spectrum in a sense. He had been a very successful coach, took Duke to its first ACC tennis championship. But beyond that, he had focused his entire career on the scholar athlete and a now faded ideal that once was iconic in American culture. But John also had a very interesting academic background. He, of course, if you already heard, has a PhD, but he served for, I think, 15 years, John, as director of undergraduate studies at Duke. So he had a lot of credibility on this subject, and to make this more attractive to me as a writer, he was terrific storyteller, had a lot of anecdotes, a lot of material that personal stories that would make this book interesting. So at that lunch, I pretty much came to a conclusion this had a lot of potential for collaboration, and that turned out to be the case.
I might just add one little caveat to that. I've been teaching and coaching for 53 years, and my career went 53 years at 3 major universities. And at the end of my career, I surmised that athletics are on the wrong path at this point, and that was one of the major emphasis of trying to write this book. Can't hear you, Janice.
I thought I was hitting the space bar to unmute. Sorry about that. One thing that you guys glossed over sort of quickly is you didn't write this book during the pandemic. You said it took 5 years to write this book.
That's correct. It did take us. It's amazing. We went to visit many of my former players, which was really, really fun to see how well they have done and what they have given back to society. They're not just takers, they are givers. And we spent a lot of time in the library and a lot of time meeting probably once a week for many, many weeks, and finally putting it all together, rereading, rewriting. It was very, very time consuming, but I thought it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed every minute of doing it. I think Alan did.
We're looking forward to hearing your talk, and I just want to let all the participants know that a link to purchase the book on Amazon is in the chat. So without further ado, I'll stop talking and ask you guys to start talking.
Well, I would add that one thing that really became more and more evident as we got into the research, and what this book is really a research intensive book. You'll see that when you read it. But we felt that there was a need to really put things in a broad context, and college sports has been important in America for a long, long time. If you look at the cover of Saturday Evening Post on October 26th, 1899, you see an incredible picture, which really is probably the first clear presentation of the scholar-athlete ideal. It goes back much further than that, but it was on the cover of Saturday Evening Post, and it depicts a scholar in cap and gown with his arm on the shoulder of a guy in a football uniform holding a pigskin under his arm, and they're in front of the university gates. And this was a very popular image in the American mind, and it continued up until World War II, when just after World War II, a series of devastating cheating scandals terribly tarnished that ideal. Then in 1951, we got the first big national television contract, and it was a steady progression, as we all know, that continues it actually today at a rampant pace of commercialization, more and more money oriented and less academic oriented. So today, the term that is so widely used, student athlete, has become hollowed out, and I would say virtually meaningless. John, do you want to add anything to that? Or?
Well, one of the things I would like to add to it is that my focus always as a coach was to be sure that the players that I had on my teams were mostly there to get a good education. That's number one. Number two was to be a good athlete. And number three was to try to focus on what you're going to do with the rest of your life. And I think we've lost the idea of the academics. I mean, today players are spending 40 hours a week practicing, and it doesn't give much time for any academic work. And then, of course, the one and done is even worse. And then if you look at the graduation rates of a lot of places, especially the big time football and basketball, it's very, very low. And we feel very strongly that the most important thing you can get is an education as well. Sports are very important. You learn a lot of good things from sports, but you're there basically to get a good education, because only a very, very, very small percentage, probably less than 1.5%, are going to make it in the pros. So what are they going to do? They're going to fall back on their education. And if you don't have one, you're kind of left out in the cold. So,
Yeah, I think this whole point of what sports gives a player is really one that we should emphasize, because it does contribute greatly to character when done correctly. And I'd just like to share these 5 really, really important aspects of the character building process, something that sports does that really not much else does in life. And that the first is it teaches a selfless that selfless effort for the good of the whole is a prerequisite for winning. It also teaches that progress and improvement only come through frequent practice, that good habits ingrain instinctive decision making, that losing is never fatal if it leads to improvement. And finally, that being competitive should not lead one into trying to diminish or vanquish the opponent. It should all be about maximizing one's own strengths. So those are pretty indispensable lessons that sports teaches. And I don't think we want to lose sight of that. It's really very important to keep in mind.
I just want to add one thing to that. It's a very interesting piece of information that we found out. In women's sports, for example, and most of the book is not about women, but we do have 2 very iconic women in the book. But in 90% of the women who are CEOs of big time companies participated in varsity sports in college. Now that says something. It's really a big statistic. And they all claim that they learned a lot from their sport participation that helped them become a CEO of a big time company. So there's something to learn in athletics, but I think we've gotten away from it. And one of the things that's caused us to get away from it is the thing I dread the most. It's called win at all cost. So we would do anything to win. We would pay the players. We would cheat. We'd do anything to win. It's just wrong. When that occurs, sports become the wrong way to go. I mean, it's just not right. So, and we point that out too. My philosophy has always been the same. If you have to cheat to win, you really haven't won. It just is. It's a false win. So, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah,
Alan?
we're to extend that a little further. We're entering now a very, very dangerous period for sports, and you all have read, I'm sure, about the strident demands to pay college athletes. I think we can fairly say that our book is perhaps the only strong counter argument to pay for play. The Supreme Court took this issue up, or actually they had a hearing last week on whether to take the appeal of a lower court's decision on pay for play. And a lot of that discussion, I listened to it on C-SPAN, focused on a famous 1984 decision by the Supreme Court that really hurt college athletics, because it it accelerated the movement toward commercialization. And the case is called Oklahoma Board of Regents versus the NCAA. And essentially it forbid the NCAA from regulating how frequently teams could play on national television. Well, the reason I wanted to cite that decision is that a really prescient dissent was written by Justice Byron. We like to call him Byron Wizard White, although he never embraced the wizard part. But he was arguably certainly one of the 2 or 3 greatest scholar athletes of all time. But White said, if you take this position, you're inexorably casting the die, and college athletes will continue to become more and more commercial, and the emphasis on education will become less and less. And boy, was he ever right. I think he nailed that. White is one of our iconic heroes. There's a chapter on him in the book, and his exploits are truly legendary, both as an athlete and as a highly successful, certainly an iconic American leader.
So I'd like to just take a second to remind people that as they have questions, to put them in the chat. Dan has already put a question in there. And I was going to ask you guys to continue and speak about your ideas for solutions.
Well, I was just thinking of that, and we have a solution. Our solution is we do want to give something back to the athletes, and we want to give them a good education. We think one of our proposals is to say, if you leave the university for any reason as a scholarship athlete, go one and done, drop out, whatever, you can come back to any university and you will receive your scholarship again, whether you participate in sports or not. That means if you could play in the NBA or the NFL or wherever for 9 years, and you can come back. As a matter of fact, I don't know if any of you noticed, a fellow named Carlos Boozer was All-American for Duke, played 1 or 2 years, came back at the age of 38 and finally finished his degree at Duke University. So we think the payment is a degree from the university. Does everybody need a degree? No, they don't. But we think if you get a degree, your probability of giving back and being successful is highly improved. And we show that very much by the scholar. The scholar athlete in our book shows that they give back exponentially more than just a normal student. And I think it's because they understand what their role is and how lucky they've been to get where they are. And it's just amazing what they give back. Incredible.
To expand just a bit on what John said, our book has 3 chapters on reform, one of which points out a large number of reasons why paying college players is really a bad idea. But the question is what to do. And we think there's a real need for some big picture reforms and then some smaller but very essential steps that could improve the current system. On the big picture side, we answer the question, pay the players in the affirmative too. We say, yes, pay them, but the form of compensation is all important. The form of compensation needs to be an excellent education. And to address that, we propose that a dedicated revenue stream from March Madness and from the college football playoff be dedicated to this purpose. Right now, there are all kinds of attempts to educate the players, but at big time college campuses where they have highly competitive athletic programs, but most of those have deteriorated into a situation where the helpers have become what they call minders. In other words, they check to see whether somebody's going to class. They actually stand at the door to check the list off. Did the guy end up there or not? This kind of stuff. So the focus needs to be on what John said, making it available to a student over a long period of time, because that may be what it takes. On a smaller level, we think you really need to address issues like the peonage, and that's the right word, we think, peonage of today's big-time college athlete. They're not students anymore. They're required to practice 40, sometimes even 50 hours a week. In addition to that, they go play games. In addition to that, there's the travel involved. So when is anybody going to study? I mean, we know that's a farce. They're not going to study. And so there need to be steps undertaken, reforms undertaken to address this problem, because, you know, it's just, this peonage has got to end. It doesn't work. The second thing is that, and this is not such a minor step, this is a huge one, but the NCAA is proving to be almost daily unreformable. And the steps will have to be addressed to that problem. Congress is looking at it. I think the NCAA has lost a tremendous amount of credibility. Its rulemaking is picayune. They want to get into the details of what some recruit and his family ate for lunch on a campus visit, that kind of stuff, instead of the real question of how are we going to educate these players. And so these reforms are all spelled out, and we think a sensible agenda can be undertaken, really has to be undertaken, because this isn't just a sports issue. And I think we wanted to discuss this in the Q&A for sure. This is a cultural issue, and it's one of the most important issues that society faces, is the education, particularly the education of players from disadvantaged backgrounds. Now, what are we going to do about that? We can't continue the status quo, because it is foisting off on millions the foolish dream that the path to success in life is professional athletes. If you want to look at high school athletes, out of every 16,000 high school athletes, only one out of 16,000 will make it to the pros. So this says a lot about where our priorities need to be. And right now they're in a very bad place.
One of the other things I'd like to mention before we go to the questions, I checked out an incredible number of mission statements for universities. I only found athletics involved in the mission statement in maybe one or two. Most of them don't even mention athletics in their mission statement. So I really think sometimes the university has strayed away from their real mission. And who's in favor of that? Well, most everybody's in favor of UNC beating Duke and Duke beating State, and all the fans that they have, and the alumni and the board of trustees, and the presidents love it too, because they're in the newspaper all the time. So it's just one of those situations where you say, what is our mission? Our mission is to educate the students first and athletics second.
So important. Are you guys ready to start answering some questions, or is there other?
Sure.
Yeah, see, you got quite a few. That's great. We love the
That's good.
Yes, you've already answered one of them, but the first question is from Dan, and it's, what path should be provided to the gifted high school athlete who does not have the scholastic aptitude for college?
Well, I have a feeling about that, to tell you the truth. If you're not qualified to go to college, you probably shouldn't go. Now, that's one of the bad parts that happen right now. Students get into colleges for big time athletics and they cannot compete. They're out of their league and they shouldn't be there. Why are they there? To promote athletics. I mean, they're not there to get an education. So if they're not scholastically able, then they need to find another path. Not everybody who's very successful is a college graduate. You can be a great person, and start your own plumbing company, or, be an electrician or a carpenter or a lot of different things. You don't have to have a college education. We just believe that a college education allows you to give back more being a scholar. But you don't have to go to college. You want to add to that, Alan?
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't really get that question. I didn't hear all of it. Could you just
I'll
summarize it?
repeat it. Dan was wondering about the path that gifted high school athletes should take if they don't have the aptitude for college.
If they're not qualified to get in college, should they go?
Right.
What do
Well,
they
I
do?
think that's really probably a fundamental difference in our system and the system often used abroad. I had the good fortune to live in Europe 3 times. The countries I lived in all had a national examination to determine who would get into various universities, and you really had to have a superb score to get into the greatest national universities. We don't have that, of course, but I think a huge part of this problem is the false signals that are sent to our youth. And, it all boils down to you can be the next Michael Jordan, you can be the next LeBron James or the next Zion Williamson. And that's just a terrible signal to send. The parent, and I might add, parents are complicit in this too, of all of the parents for high school students. One recent who play sports. One recent survey showed that 26% want their kids to play professional sports. Well, that's not a great aspiration. I mean, we want kids to be aspirational, but and to play sports and to get a lot out of sports. But to think that that can be the end for a large number is just totally unrealistic. So that there has to be some greater balance. And I think the issue of all of this focus on pay for play, a lot of that originates from disgust with the current system, and I think understandable dismay at the way this affects disadvantaged neighborhoods, because people see sports writers and the cognoscenti see these kids on the court during March Madness, which has got $1 billion, generating $1 billion a year in revenue. They're not getting anything. That's the prevailing view. And so no wonder people are outraged. It's a system that's got some very, very fundamental flaws that have to be addressed.
It's sort of interesting because while you were talking, I was thinking about, talking about high school sports. And I know where I went to school, and a lot of times on TV, it's like the high school athlete that's the most popular person or
Right.
people in class. So
Well,
I think this idea, people naturally gravitate towards them. And so I don't want to say getting something for nothing by any means, but I think they're used to being catered to in high school already.
well, I think that's true now. When I grew up, we certainly were not catered to as high school athletes. And I was an athlete in high school and in college, both. But today's world is so different. For example, parents are complicit in this because look how many parents go to travel teams. My own grandson was a hockey player. My daughter and son-in-law, they traveled all over the country, taking him to these hockey games, spending an inordinate amount of money and amount of time. And he really enjoyed it, so I thought it was worth it. But they had to realize that he really wasn't going to be a professional hockey player. So he went to college and got a degree and is doing very well. But I mean, most parents have this dream that their children are going to be the next superstar. And it's just very unrealistic dream.
Yes, and a follow-up to that from Shirley and Bob is that the problem begins in high school when the recruiting begins too early and the emphasis on sports begins too early.
They start recruiting them in junior high school now.
Oh, God.
There was a story just the other day that they're just keep going down further in the grade levels to recruit kids and fast track them for
Yeah,
bigger and greater things.
crazy.
Yeah, yes. Does anyone else have some questions they want to share?
Yeah. You have another question? Okay, good.
Yes, this is from Henry. And he says that baseball has farm teams for players out of high school. Is such a system needed for football and basketball? What a great question.
They do have farm teams for basketball now. They have another league that you can go to right out of high school. I don't know about football, but I don't think they have anything like that for football. So they're probably still going to stay as the farm team for the NFL. They're
Yeah.
actually talking now about paying high school players. It's amazing.
Yeah, the college baseball serves to some extent as a farm system for Major League Baseball. They don't get all their players there, but they do get quite a few, and so there's a feeder system that is at work. I think probably football is the one where that's least less the case, but it's sports. A fixation on sports has permeated the entire society. And I think one thing we really have completely lost sight of that's critical in this whole equation is we need people in our society desperately. We need more and more who can have the training and education and capability to lead high impact lives. And in our book, we focus on quite a few of John's former players. We went out and interviewed these guys, actually stayed in some of their homes and looked at what they had actually done with their lives. And they had been enormously successful, not just some of them enormously successful in a financial sense, but almost all of them had a ripple effect. In fact, we have a chapter called The Ripple Effect.
Yeah.
On their communities, on the state level, and even national level. And so this is something we don't want to lose sight of, is that is a huge and necessary part of our college sports system. And we have to, I think, give it more attention and much greater priority.
Yeah. Oh, all right. So now the questions are starting to pour in. So I have a question from Norma asking what criteria you use to include stories about athletes in your book.
Well, we interviewed by phone and actually went in person to a lot of places. And we picked out, the players that were probably the most prominent players and probably the most prominent graduate students. 40% of my tennis players who we interviewed all had graduate degrees, many of them PhDs and MDs and MBAs and all those things. And it was amazing how willing they were willing to talk to us about how important sports were to them and how important it was that our major focus was on academics, and that what they were willing to do to give back to their society. Many of them, for example, the physicians are going to underserved countries and doing medical procedures for them and helping them with equipment and things like that, and go every year. And I'm really impressed because some of them are very, very wealthy now, and they're still willing to go and give back to other people who are not quite as well off as they are.
I'd like to just cite one example of chapter in the book on a guy named Paul Auerbach, and actually this is the chapter named The Ripple Effect. Auerbach was not a great athlete. He played for John on one of his first tennis teams, and he was more of a practice player than a regular. I think he did get some varsity action, John, but not very much. Anyway, he went on he had an internship on one of the Indian reservations out west, and he became very taken with the lack of information about wilderness medicine. And to boil a lot down into a short space, Paul Auerbach created the study of the formal study of wilderness medicine. If we have any doctors here, you will be very familiar with the fact that wilderness medicine is now taught in more than 80 medical schools. He wrote the textbook that no one would, I don't think anyone would try to replicate or duplicate it. I weighed it on a bathroom scales. He sent it to me, weighed 10 pounds. So it's a very definitive work. And then he wrote a popular account called Medicine for the Outdoors, which became a bestseller. He's an emergency room physician at Stanford University, and we figured out he has trained about 5,000 physicians in his career. They in turn have treated thousands more. We actually have the numbers in the book. And so the ripple effect of his life is enormous. And I would just close by saying he led earthquake relief teams first to Haiti in 2012, the worst earthquake in the Western Hemisphere, just caused devastating loss of life. And he worked actually there for 2 weeks to the point of collapse. I mean, that was how grueling the demands were there for his services, because the whole country had been devastated. So I think it's helpful to look at a life like Paul's and what an enormous impact it can have. And he was not a great athlete, but he learned the lessons of athletics, and he got the character. And most of all, I think he got the concern for his fellow man, for his community, and for the world at large that made him, he's one of our heroes.
Yes.
I would just like to add that real briefly, that we also believe that you don't actually have to have a college education and be a scholar to give back. But if you are a scholar athlete, your probability of giving back and being a very good citizen is much, much higher. So,
So this brings me to the next question. Does your book or your research address the different season sports, like football and basketball versus like spring sports like tennis and golf? This is from Sydney and Rachel Strauss.
well, no, actually we focused mostly on football and basketball, the big time money revenue sports. But just to tell you, tennis and the non-revenue sports have fallen into the same kind of trap. They practice all the time. Now, if you take the Atlantic Coast Conference, now they expanded out their conference. So you got to go all the way to New York or all the way to Miami to travel. So the non-revenue sports are caught in a bind because they're gone a lot more, they spend a lot more money, and they don't generate any revenue. So now with the pandemic and everything else, a lot of universities are cutting sports off. For example, Stanford dropped 6 varsity sports. People are dropping sports now, especially the non-revenues, because they say they can't afford them, but they're not going to drop football and basketball, that's for sure. And it's a shame. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, because one of the things that's been so dramatically good for the universities is what we call the sports clubs. I don't know if you're familiar with those. Duke University has 36 sports clubs where people participate in the clubs, play other schools, practice 15 hours a week, do all their own coaching, spend their own money, and get the same benefits that the varsity athletes get.
Thank you. So Dan has a follow-up question. Should college athletes be financially compensated, as they're currently requesting, a
Well,
share of the TV revenues that major college programs are receiving?
say that again.
Should college athletes be financially compensated as a share of the TV revenue that major college programs are receiving?
Well, if they are compensated, and that's one of the big issues right now in front of the Supreme Court, should an individual, a basketball, football player, tennis player, whatever, be able to sell their image? My question is, do you call them then employee athletes? Will you pay workers' compensation? Will they be in the retirement plan? Will they be required to file W-2s? Will they all have agents? How much time will they spend making videos? The bidding wars between universities will be exponential. University of North Carolina might pay a guy $50,000 for a commercial on his car shop, but Duke was saying, well, we'll give you $75,000. So it gets to a bidding war. It's just crazy because that's not the function of the university. The function of the university, the mission is to educate the students. And do we want to pay them? Yes, we've already said we want to give them a good education. That's our pay.
Okay.
Yeah, just on a very practical level, example of what John just said, the reality is that most of the compensation in form will be from social media. How many social media followers does the athlete have? That will determine what level of compensation he gets for his or her endorsement. So if you think about that, the college athlete already has a huge workload of 40 or more hours per week committed to practice. Now, if this were to go forward, in addition to that, they're going to be chasing social media followers because that's how they're going to make money. And so there will be no time at all for study, for getting an education whatsoever, because they're going to be chasing down everybody they can find to add to their list to jack up the endorsement fee. So it's fraught with difficulties.
Yeah. I have another question. The problems with big time college athletics are really, it sounds like, boiled down to football and basketball. Aren't the other sports more conducive to the scholar athlete model? And also the argument that football and basketball are necessary to fund all other sports. Is that valid?
Yes and no. The non-revenue sports are caught in the same kind of trap because the amount of time they have to practice. For example, if you're losing, you don't do well on the win-loss column in wrestling or track and field or tennis, they get fired. Doesn't matter if all your students graduate, doesn't matter if they're all good scholars, makes no difference what they do academically. Your win-loss record determines everything. So what does that promote? It promotes the probability of cheating. So what will you do to get the best player into school? Well, you might do anything. You might go to the admissions office and say, well, can you give me a special break? He doesn't qualify to get into school, but I want him in here anyway because he'll keep me on my job. We'll win more matches. I won't get fired. It's crazy, the win-loss. There has to be another way to evaluate coaches other than the win-loss record. Now, I'm not a very good loser, to tell you the truth, and I like winning in matches, but I don't think it's the only criteria. I think it's one of the criteria that coaches should be evaluated on.
From Lynn and Art, they were wondering why a value is not placed on the scholarship itself, considering the cost of a college education, especially at universities such as Duke.
Well, the major reason, in my opinion, that we've got to this point is that boards of trustees love it. They love Duke beating Carolina, and vice versa, and the competition is fierce. The promotion and the publicity that the universities get, they like that too, and it's so big time now. The alumni, if the coach is a big time winning coach, but he has a scandal, usually the president gets fired, not the coach, and it's just wrong. I mean, they need to punish the coaches who are not doing what they're supposed to do, but the presidents like it too because they get good advertisement, for their university. So
Yeah.
it's a big dilemma.
Yes. So Shirley and Bob were wondering if the star athlete is quote unquote paid, what about the walk-on, the tennis player, the swimmer?
Well, I'll just answer that really quick. You don't get many walk-ons. most of the time the coaches are recruiting the players, and you get one or two. For example, in tennis, you have 6 players that actually play, and usually you have a team of 8 or 10 or 12. But very few of them are walk-on. We used to have some walk-ons. Now, in today's world, I don't think the tennis team has any walk-ons at all that come into practice. They just don't have them. Everybody recruits all the players, so they're not any walk-ons coming. Football likes walk-ons. University of Alabama has probably 15 or 20 walk-ons. Duke maybe has 3 or 4, which is a big disadvantage for them because they don't get any people who are not on scholarship. So it's a problem.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just one quick thing to add to that is John mentioned earlier club sports. We have a chapter on club sports. In many ways, that really is the greatest source of the scholar athlete, those who will go on to lead high impact lives. So the last place, in our opinion, you want to cut is to cut club sports, because this is a much more productive area of athletic activity in terms of the actual benefits and value generated. So it's critical. And so many of the people that are walk-ons, so to speak, or would-be walk-ons, will end up in club sports, and they'll flourish there.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, a question from Sean. One of her co-workers is a walk-on soccer player because her coach saw she can get an academic scholarship rather than a sports scholarship. How common is that?
Not very common. I think every coach would love to have an academic scholarship, but in a lot of cases, the academic scholarship counts against you. For example, in tennis, the men's tennis team gets 4 full scholarships. The women's tennis team gets 8. So the women don't care about walk-ons at all. The men would be more likely. And all that is to make sure that the gender equity is the same. It's the same number of women get a scholarship total as men. Now, what happens is football throws it way out of whack because they have 48 full-time scholarships. So you got, in order to get the women to be equal to that, you have to have scholarships, and academic scholarships count against your number of scholarships too. So you can't, the tennis team could have 1 guy on an academic scholarship or 1 girl, but then they could only have 3 on an athletic scholarship. So it's not a big advantage, but it doesn't use their money, so it's good.
Yeah. So BJ was wondering, what about some type of compensation for low-income students to travel home, have spending money, or other day-to-day expenses? Because regular students can work in the bookstore or the cafeteria. Why shouldn't some students receive modest income to cover their basic expenses that their tuition doesn't cover?
Well, I think they do now have the ability, they do pay their way back and forth to home once or twice a year. I'm not sure exactly how many that is. And previously they had, a number of years ago, they had where they got $60 a month for laundry money. Now I think they get some small stipend too, but it's not much. And, you know, but they do get all their meals free, you know, and they get their dorm room free, and they get their tuition free. So at Duke, you're talking about $70,000 a year. So it's not like they don't get anything. And the UNC is probably closer to what, 22, 24,000. But they are getting paid in a certain way. And you know, how many students go out as universities now with debt? Incredible number. If you're on a college scholarship, you go out of school with no debt, which is fantastic.
Oh, true.
Yeah, I think we're very supportive of the need for some modest stipend to particularly assist the minority students with travel and other essential expenses. But again, the real focus has to be on education, and I think much more can be done to mentor students, to give them access to people who can tutor them a whole lot of things. Now, again, there are programs at most of the Division I schools to assist college athletes and to help them along their way. But again, those programs have devolved into something other than what they were intended for. Mostly they're trying to keep up with the student. In fact, as I said earlier, they call the people that are doing that minders. Well, that's a term kind of tells it all. They're checking to make sure they're going to bed on the proper time, that they showed up at the classroom. So focus needs to be on trying to help them learn and to address the basic study skills that it takes to become a good student and hopefully a scholar athlete.
Okay, so we have a little over 5 minutes left, and I have 2 more questions. And if anybody else wants to add a question, please do so right now. Shirley Bob was wondering about the enormous compensation to the coaches.
Are the coaches overpaid? Absolutely. They are overpaid. Most of the coaches love what they do. They would do it for half of what they're making or less. I mean, I don't think that, you can't fire them. I mean, they love what they do. So why are they making so much money? Because they say it's supply and demand. Okay, everybody worries about Coach K leaving Duke University, makes over $8 million a year. Duke University's never had a losing coach, but they're going to pay him $8 million because they're worried he might leave. Well, there's another coach out there that'll probably do the same job for 4,000 or 4 million or 2 million, but everybody's so worried he's going to leave that they don't want to lose him. They keep paying him.
Yes.
One of the disgraceful aspects of the current system is that these coaching contracts often lead to enormous buyouts. I mean, obscene buyouts. Charlie Weiss, was it Kansas? He was at Kansas.
Kansas, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think he got almost $20 million after losing for 3 consecutive seasons. $20 million payout. And that's happened frequently in recent years because, as John says, they get into these ridiculous contracts, compensating the coaches, and then having buyout provisions that leave the university, hanging there to pick up the pieces after a big mess has been made.
One of the amazing statistics is that in 21 states, the football or the basketball coach is the highest paid public employee in 21 different states.
Wow. You guys know so much about this and so many statistics. Henry asked the last question that's on a different topic, wondering how you feel about transgender girls playing on women's teams.
Well, I'm not opposed to transgender. I do think it makes unfair competition. I'll go back a long way to Renee Richards, who was a transgender, played in the U.S. Open, and she came as a man playing in the women's tournament. She won the U.S. Open championship, but when she played in the men's tournament, she couldn't get out of the qualifying. So I think it makes unfair competition, to tell you the truth. What's the answer? I don't know. Is it unfair to them? I don't know, but I don't think it's fair competition. So.
No, thank you. Well, everybody, thanks so much for coming to our brunch. And John and Alan, you guys are just a wealth of information. I mean, the statistics that you can just say right off the top of your head is just incredible. And
well, thank you for inviting us.
Sure. It was great. No,
we're really happy to do it because
marching toward madness.
If you haven't read it, it's a good book. All of my friends love it. My doctor friends, my lawyer friends, even people that aren't sports fans, they love this book. All 5-star reviews.
Wow. Yes. So thank you. Thank you again. And before we leave, I do have a few announcements. For all of the announcements, You can find the information last Wednesday's Beth Meyer email. But a few, and especially one that's about to start, is Rabbi Jenny putting on a class called Why I Go to Mikveh. There's a new class coming up called Introduction to Modern Hebrew, and that starts today at 1 o'clock. 7:30 every night until Shavuos. We have a spiritual counting of the Omer. The people of the book club, the third session on Julius Lester's book Love Song will be on Monday evening. We will have a special speaker for Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut at 7:30. And of course, our weekly Wednesday morning study group at 11 a.m. on April 14th, and the Wednesday evening minyan at 7 o'clock. Information about all of this is also available at the April Hamagid, or you can always contact the main office. I'd like to thank everyone so much for supporting our brunches this past year. We've had a wonderful group of speakers about many different, very interesting topics. And we're working on topics for next year. So if you have any suggestions or you have any requests, things you might be interested in hearing about, please share that either with me, or you can call the office or share it with Amy. And quickly, I will put my email in the chat right now, so you'll have it if you'd like to get in touch with me about everything. So, whoops, I'm trying to send it to everyone.
Stay safe.
Okay. Yes, please.
Thanks for good questions.
Yes, very good. And what a wonderful way to get the morning started. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.